episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest for you today, helping to create a better tomorrow on many fronts. Today, we have the opportunity to talk with Dr. Tia Raines, who is the Vice President of Customer Engagement and Strategic Development at Ajinomoto Health and Nutrition of North America, which is a North American division of the Japanese food and biotech company Ajinomoto Corporation, which is involved in many areas from seasonings to cooking oils, frozen foods, beverages, sweeteners, amino acids, and pharmaceutical products. Dr. Raines has been working for over 20 years in the area of health and wellness initiatives within the food and beverage sector. She works at the intersection of nutrition research and communications, ultimately with the goal of advancing credible research in nutrition and developing truthful messaging on new research results in the context of the body of nutrition evidence. Dr. Raines most recently headed up the Egg Nutrition Center as its executive director, and prior to joining the Egg Nutrition Center, she was Senior Director of Metabolic Sciences at Biofortis Clinical Research, which is a global contract research organization specializing in design and conduct of clinical trials, focusing on food, beverages, and supplements with companies around the world. Prior to that, Dr. Raines held several positions within R&D at Kraft Foods, including roles in nutrition research and product development. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Food Science and Human Nutrition from Arizona State University, her Ph.D. in Nutritional Sciences, University of Illinois, and she has authored over 40 scientific articles and book chapters, and is a quite frequent public speaker at universities, health professional meetings, and various industry events. Dr. Tia Raines, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks, great to be here.
It's great having you. I like to start things off as we typically do for a couple of minutes, giving you the floor to just talk a little bit more about yourself. If you can sort of give us the backgrounds of the background, everything from where you grew up, and a little bit of how you got interested in the nutritional sciences. I think that'd be a great way to start things off.
Sure, happy to. Well, I grew up outside of Chicago in the Chicago suburbs, where I still reside, despite several attempts to maybe relocate to warmer weather, but this is my home and where I'm raising my family and where I was raised. So my family is still here in the area. I guess I was one of those kids that very early on had an interest in the topic of health and wellness. And probably as early as kind of middle school, because I was a competitive swimmer. I was very lucky to hit the pool when I was 8 years old and be one of the top swimmers in the state of Illinois from the time I really began. And so I was competing at a pretty high level pretty early. And like many competitive athletes, I wanted to do whatever I could to have that competitive edge. And so I really started paying attention to what I ate and what I was doing so that I could swim as fast as possible. I had two parents that supported that, and a mother that always had an interest in food and nutrition. She was a home economics teacher, which that term isn't used anymore, but consumer sciences is what it's called. And so she taught foods in high school. And so she was always very supportive of making sure that we had just access to a lot of good quality foods at home. And so that's really where I developed this interest. And I realize how unique that is now, to develop a passion for something when you're young and be able to study it throughout your education and then pursue it as a career. I have 3 daughters that are in college now, and only one of them really knows what they want to do when they grow up, and they really struggled with it. And that was never a struggle for me. I had determined very early on what I wanted to do, but I thought I wanted to be an academic because, again, my mother was a teacher. In fact, my sister ended up pursuing education, teaches in middle school in the same suburb that I grew up in outside Chicago. She married a teacher, and education was always a big part of my life when I was young. And so I had decided that I wanted to work at a university and be able to teach, and then be able to also do research. I had an interest in the research side of of nutrition. And so when I started my undergrad, I was very lucky enough to be a scholarship athlete. So I went to Arizona State on a swimming scholarship. At the time, it was one of the top swimming schools in the US. So I was very fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to swim there. And I started the food and nutrition curriculum as a freshman, and had pretty much decided that first day that I was headed towards a PhD program, again, setting my sights on an academic career. And I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I had a injury halfway through my sophomore year, which made my swimming career more challenging to pursue. I had several surgeries on my shoulder, and it takes a long time to recover from those. And because I was out of the pool, it gave me more opportunity to pursue my academic intellectual interests. So I was able to pick up some research projects as an undergrad. I was able to work at a home feeding company. Caremark at the time was doing work where they were going into people's homes and providing enteral feedings for people that were ill and couldn't get to the hospital, or as a convenience, as well as parenteral feeding. So I was able to really kind of dive into the industry and get some more experiences in this field that I already loved. And it just made it more clear that I was in the right space, and that really was where I wanted to dedicate my efforts. From there, I ended up even though I swore I would never move back to Illinois, I ended up at University of Illinois, mostly because, and I think the program is still this way, it's more basic in their study of nutrition, meaning that we were really looking at the mechanistic level, what was happening with diet, nutrient interactions. And so I ended up working for a new faculty member there that was actually a molecular biologist that not only had an appointment in the food science area and was part of the nutritional sciences program, but he also was part of the neuroscience program. And so I had, I guess, a kind of a unique PhD experience where I was doing a lot of work in the brain, understanding what neuropeptides and neurochemicals were controlling appetite, and then what was the impact of different interventions on the either gene expression as well as the kind of the secretion of those full either peptides or neurochemicals within parts of the brain of laboratory rodents. So it was, again, very, very basic, but a nice complement to the education I had already had in the field of nutrition, which was more applied. And I feel like I got that exposure to understanding, not only the applied aspect of nutrition in terms of human behavior and what is the impact on metabolic health, but then also understanding fundamentally what's going on at the molecular cellular level to try to explain sort of the underpinnings or the what's happening kind of in the nitty gritty there. And I ended up, again, thinking I would parlay this experience in my PhD work into a career in academia. And I guess I just stumbled into this career at Kraft Foods early on through a discussion with a person that was on our advisory committee at University of Illinois. They came down, we had exposure again to folks that were in the food industry, in government, and in academia. And in talking with the head of nutrition at the time at Kraft, she sort of was sharing with me how you can take your understanding of nutrition and apply it into the food industry. Because I hadn't really thought of that as a career path. And I wasn't really clear, what does somebody with a PhD in nutrition science do within a food company? And she really, I guess, sold me on this career path, because she said, we need people like you that have this understanding of nutrition, again, down to kind of the nitty gritty. We need you part of the team to advise the company on whether it's, ingredients that we should be pursuing and setting up studies to be able to understand the impact of those ingredients on health, or making sure the company isn't going to be compromising its integrity by pursuing areas of study or certain food products that don't make sense from a nutrition standpoint. And we need people like you part of this team. And so I ended up sort of taking the leap and had my first job at Kraft Foods right out of getting my Ph.D. in nutrition sciences.
Outstanding. Really outstanding journey. And yeah, there's a lot of things in that. I'm going to definitely unpack it through our discussion. But one of the first places I really think I'd like to start off with, you were profiled, I think recently in the Ajinomoto news in an article entitled "Busting Nutrition Myths, Tia Raines Built Her Career Correcting Misconceptions Around Food." And the article goes into your amazing sort of success at the on the egg research front, and sort of there was this public vilification of eggs and heart disease, and you sort of really had amazing success there in terms of focusing on the nutrition-rich component there and sort of the benefits. And I got you thinking, this is a extremely tough place to sort of change conceptions, is unlike whether it's tobacco or sort of my old industry of pharmaceuticals. Whether I like red wine or you like white wine, or my wife likes dark chocolate or I don't, and so forth. This is people get really intense about this whole area because it's something they experience every day. Talk a little bit about how you ended up in this position of myth busting, and then if you could take us a little through sort of the egg journey, and then obviously MSG has sort of been the new focus of yours the last couple of years. Talk a little bit about some of the battles and sort of the experiences of sort of this myth busting role that you've been in.
Sure. So if you would have asked me 20 something years ago when I graduated with my PhD if I would be doing this today, I would have said, of course not. This was not something I foresaw in my future. But it's funny, now that I'm here and part of this myth busting or in that space, it really is the culmination of my interest in education with my passion and interest around science. And that's essentially what I'm doing, is being a scientific communicator. And so it is sort of feeding that need that I always had for pursuing a career in education. I'm just doing it in a very different way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, I didn't know I was going to evolve to that, but yet here I am. And it is really, this all of the things I love doing within the field of nutrition, I'm doing them just very differently than I had thought originally. And it was sort of an accident that I got there. I had spent the first part of my career more focused on the science and more focused on actual research, and then applying that or translating that, whether it was at Kraft Foods or then I was with this CRO, a contract research organization, where we were doing clinical studies for different either food or pharmaceutical or supplement partners. And then I had gotten, I guess, interested in a position that was at the American Egg Board to come on board and run their research program. So that's really how I ended up there. There was a annual grant program, and every year we received proposals from really around the U.S. primarily, sometimes around the world, and I oversaw that program. And I found that through just time there and other parts of the organization, that I enjoyed taking the findings of that research and having that conversation with key stakeholders on what that science showed. So that's essentially these commodity boards. There's 20 something of them, all under USDA oversight, and they're called research and promotion boards because that's essentially what they're allowed to do. They're allowed to do research, and then they're allowed to do promotion, and the promotion side can also be synonymous with education, whether that education is for health professionals or the general public or other stakeholders. And so I was finding myself doing more of that. I was doing both. Essentially, I was doing the research or overseeing the research program, working with experts in the field to identify the strongest studies to support financially. And then I was taking that science once it was published and explaining what that showed to different stakeholders. And, at the time when I had started with the Egg Board, that's when eggs were still sort of viewed negatively. Mm-hmm. We had a cholesterol cap within the dietary guidelines for Americans. The American Heart Association was still pretty negative on dietary cholesterol, and eggs had always been the poster child for dietary cholesterol and heart disease. And my predecessors at the Egg Board had been investing in the research for some time. I came on board and we were still focusing on kind of what I would say the defensive side of eggs and heart disease, where we were having to show over and over again that reasonable consumption of eggs, 1 to 2 eggs a day, does not have a significant impact on dietary cholesterol. And so we had to build up that science and be able to, you can't just do one study that doesn't, prove anything. You have to sort of have many studies in different sets of people and in different contexts to be able to kind of build up this dossier of scientific evidence. So we were supporting this research on heart disease, but I think what I sort of maybe brought to the Egg Board was starting to think about not just the cholesterol aspect of what's in eggs, but what else is in eggs that we can talk about that may have an impact on health.
Yep.
And we really focused on the choline. Choline is a nutrient within the egg, because eggs are one of the few foods that are pretty dense in this nutrient choline. And at the time, a lot of people weren't talking about choline, but there were early indicators that choline was maybe underappreciated because of its role in brain health, both in terms of a developing brain. So during pregnancy, choline is very important to laying down the neural networks that are in the developing brain, but then as well as on the other end of the aged brain, choline is also an important nutrient there. And there's some epidemiology that's showing it can help, at least it's linked to brain health during aging. And so that's really where we started shifting the research program a bit, was to say, okay, if these other lines of evidence are true, that choline is important in brain health, what do we know about the choline that's within the egg? And then is there any relationship between eggs and brain health? And so that's where we started to invest in more science. There were a lot of researchers that were also pivoting to better understanding that. And so we were able to help those investigators kind of really start pursuing that linkage there. And that started to then, when you started talking to people about eggs, it was hard to just say that they were cholesterol bombs, because you could say, well, they also had some good things in there that are unique to eggs. And I think that's really what we started to really shift the discussion a little bit and get people thinking, okay, there's a lot more in the egg than just the cholesterol component. The protein component also was of interest to a lot of investigators. It's one of the highest quality sources of protein, and it's certainly easy, inexpensive, convenient, et cetera. And so, just through that process of investing in this research and having that conversation, I sort of evolved into this role of myth busting, where you get to have that conversation with people and say, don't just think of eggs as being something that can be harmful. Here, they also have something in them that can be very beneficial. And depending on what stage of life that you're in, all of a sudden this becomes a food that's very important. So, for example, during pregnancy, and then also during the developing brain of a child, that choline compound is essential really for normal brain health. And that was really the strategy that we were taking there, was to make sure people weren't discounting the egg for one nutrient without recognizing that it's a package that has other things in there that could be beneficial to health. And then during my time there as well, finally, the amount of research on kind of exonerating the cholesterol component had made its way into public health guidance. So American Heart Association kind of removed their strict threshold on dietary cholesterol and said that eggs can be part of a healthy diet. And then the dietary guidelines for Americans also followed suit. and said that dietary cholesterol is no longer a real nutrient of concern because people weren't eating very high levels of cholesterol anymore. The diet had changed over time. And so those two things made it just opened up the doors for eggs, I think, to be looked at much differently than they had been in the past. So that's sort of my eggs story and where I left it. And you know, I actually, once I left the American Egg Board, a couple of my friends ended up kind of stepping into the role, and they've done a great job of kind of continuing to understand the benefits of eggs and how they fit into a healthy diet pattern. So it's been fun to see that positive news about eggs continue on since I left. But I ended up coming to Ajinomoto because of this challenge of MSG, or monosodium glutamate. And when I first got the call there was a recruiter that reached out to me. Somebody had recommended me for this position at Ajinomoto because of what I had done when I was at the Egg Board. And I remember getting the call. I was in my car driving home from work, and the recruiter said, you know, I still don't know who recommended me. Somebody recommended you. Would you consider this job at Ajinomoto? I said, well, what is the job? And they said, well, it's to help change Americans' perceptions of MSG. And I just remember, I think I said no before they even got the whole sentence out about monosodium glutamate. I said, I just don't want to start over. We're in such a good place with eggs. I enjoyed my job there. If you ever get an opportunity to work with farmers, whether they're egg producers or other farmers, you just feel it's a really great role to be that integrated to where our food comes from. Yep. And I was really enjoying it. And I just thought, I don't know if I can do this with MSG. But the recruiter, and I give her a lot of credit, she goes, go do some homework on the company, do some homework on MSG, and then let's talk next week. And so I did. And I immediately, within 15 minutes, I realized that I had to take this job because MSG was a little bit different than eggs, because the science proving that MSG is safe and innocuous is overwhelming. Every major regulatory agency around the world has reviewed the scientific evidence and all concluded the same thing. It's safe when used as a seasoning in food. And so the issue, and I guess what was of interest to me, is that the issue wasn't that the science needed to be evolved, which was the story with eggs. It's that the science is good and solid, but consumer perception in the US, as well as other parts of the world, that was lagging behind. People didn't understand that the science was so buttoned up and so black and white that it's safe for consumption. And actually, what really drug me here is that it's a very effective way to reduce sodium in the diet. And when I was at Kraft Foods, that's when the beginning of the sodium issue was really, maybe even like in the thick of it, because the food companies were using a lot of sodium, and they were putting it a lot in products to make products taste good, and it became a big issue. And here we are 20 something years later, 9 out of 10 Americans consume more sodium than what's healthy. Yep. The average intake is 1 gram over the target. So we still have this huge issue with sodium in this country. And here you have an ingredient that tastes good, that can be used to reduce the sodium in a food by anywhere from 30 to 60%, depending on what the application is. And as a nutrition scientist, that is what probably brought me here, because I thought, here you have something that's so effective, and the sensory studies that have been done on MSG will show that it's usually parity. So if you can reduce the sodium by 30% with MSG and ask consumers if they like it the same, they'll either say, I like it the same, taste the same, or I like it better. So here you have something that works so effectively, and people aren't using it, and food companies aren't using it as a tool because of the perception issues. And I thought, well, you know what? I guess I want to be part of this change. I want to be part of the myth busting, if you will, when it comes to MSG. And that's essentially what brought me here to Ajinomoto I guess it's been 3.5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And continuing along with that, I mean, obviously, Ajinomoto is the world's largest producer of MSG, but you're very active in all things amino science, I think the term is. As you're saying, here's an example. MSG, obviously, a great flavoring, helps replace sodium, but amino acids, a very wide spectrum of possibilities there. Everything from functional foods. You mentioned enteral feeding earlier on, up the chain to medicines and pharmaceuticals, and we've been learning so much about. Especially during the pandemic, microRNA is this theme that's in everyone's mind now of something that obviously we knew about from biology, but now we have pharmaceutical products and so forth. What's hot in sort of the amino science world when we look sort of upstream at some of these other opportunities beyond flavorings? What's exciting to you that you see, and where you would take this in terms of further exploration of the possibilities of amino acids?
Yeah, I think we're just beginning to understand what amino acids can do beyond be the building blocks of protein.
Right.
And if I could just back up, so the Ajinomoto as a company was founded on the discovery of glutamate, essentially, which is one of the 20 amino acids.
Yep.
Glutamate's actually the most predominant amino acid in nature. It's everywhere in plants and in animals and in humans. Our bodies are making glutamate as we sit here right now. And in fact, it's the primary amino acid in breast milk. It's very important to life. It's not only important in the brain as a neurotransmitter, it helps lay down memory. So without glutamate, you wouldn't be remembering anything, but it's also important for metabolism. So it's in every cell, and it's doing its work constantly throughout life. And that's why it's such a disconnect to consider glutamate, when it's attached to a sodium ion, is somehow evil and causing all of these issues, when it is everywhere, and certainly in the food that we eat, as well as our own body. So it's an important compound throughout life. And that's what started the company. And then over time, the company developed more expertise in not only making amino acids, because there's a couple ways to get amino acids, right? You can extract them from protein. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein.
Sure.
But we actually make amino acids through fermentation.
Yep.
There are bacteria that are found in nature that will convert a sugar substrate like glucose into an amino acid like glutamate, like any of the amino acids that are out there. With exceptions. Not all amino acids can be made by fermentation, and that's probably because we just haven't discovered what's the microorganism yet that can do that conversion. So, back to your question, kind of where are things going with amino acids? A couple things. On the food side, much like glutamate has this umami taste, so that's what binds to the umami taste receptor in the mouth. There are other amino acids that also have tastes. So like glycine is sweet. It's a sweeter amino acid. And so that's really rich in like crab or, surimi, that brings that kind of sweetness to those foods. And then there's other amino acids that are bitter. So most of the branched chain amino acids that get a lot of attention because of their role in building muscle, they're very bitter to taste, which is why if you're buying an amino acid supplement that's pure amino acids, usually it's going to be in some sort of sweetened powder or sweetened beverage to try to mask that bitterness. But then there's other amino acids that also offer different types of taste. So like cysteine, which is an amino acid, a sulfur containing amino acid, when used at very small levels, it can bring a meaty taste to something. And so you can use them in foods to be able to offer different tastes that are perceptible to humans. So I think that's kind of an interesting area to consider, is sort of how do we use amino acids as natural flavorings, if you will, because they are associated with these different tastes. And then on the health side, there's a bunch of research that's going on right now in different regards. So certainly the branched chain amino acids, there continues to be a lot of interest there in understanding how you can come up with the right ratios of amino acids to be able to, whether it's prevent protein breakdown. So Ajinomoto does a lot of research in elderly because of the population in Japan, which is skews
Sure.
older. They are really focused on quality of life and kind of extending healthy living years. And one of the ways that Ajinomoto is focused on that is by looking at how do you preserve muscle function for a longer period of time, so you can prevent falls and things of that regard. But then they're also interested in amino acids in different ways. So there's combination of amino acids that it's sold as a supplement in Japan, as well as I think you can get it here, that can help with sleep quality.
Okay.
So that will help kind of that, a longer period of that deep sleep so that you wake up feeling more refreshed. In Japan, they sell a amino acid combination that is supposed to help with hangovers or prevent hangovers, so that you take it either before or while you're drinking. And so that is supposed to help with the metabolism of alcohol, so that you're less likely to develop some of the side effects that come with overconsumption of alcohol. And that's just a couple of examples of things that we've been investigating, as well as Ajinomoto has a medical foods division here in the US, which is focused on, I would say their expertise is really in PKU and developing foods that can ensure that kids in particular that have PKU can have as normal of a life as possible by eating as normal foods as possible that have been specially formulated to not have phenylalanine, or to change the ratio of other amino acids to sort of compete with phenylalanine to ensure that it doesn't get absorbed. And then what you're really trying to do with PKU is keep phenylalanine out of the brain, because it can accumulate and it can cause permanent brain damage in these kids and negatively affect the rest of their life. But if you can intervene, and of course all infants are tested for PKU very early on, it's just an inborn error of metabolism that occurs randomly with humans. But if you can get infants and then kids on a diet that has no phenylalanine or very low in phenylalanine, then they can have a very, very normal life, but it's a challenge. And so through amino acid technology, Ajinomoto's been able to develop a whole line of food products, breads, soups, everything that we are used to eating. But again, it's all specially formulated to not have phenylalanine. And then they also have products that are specific to a couple other inborn errors of metabolism that are, again, rooted in some sort of amino acid dysfunction within the body. And the foods are formulated to either not have that amino acid or to take advantage of what is known about amino acids in terms of competition at either the gut level for absorption or even at the blood-brain barrier level, to ensure that these individuals have as normal of a life as possible and reach their cognitive potential.
Very exciting, really exciting. And you got me thinking, as you're talking about some of these segments in terms of the medicinal foods, which is a very unique space in the US, and obviously functional foods, gets me thinking about this concept you were talking about a little earlier in the intro, looking at gene expression or this nutrigenomics space, and then thinking to obviously your experience in eggs, and then obviously when you talked to Chris Cifelli a couple episodes ago with milk, and as you were saying, all these things that we know are there, but we've really never studied, and marrying them up with some of these tools now to look at gene expression. What's your feel about where we've come with nutrigenomics? Where is it going in terms of, and not just as you were saying with the specialized medical food, but hey, if we can study a certain whatever egg, milk, bananas, whatever it may be, and hey, we have these really interesting gene expression profiles. Where can we go with a lot of that in terms of the medicinal and the functional foods in the future?
Yeah, I think that's an exciting area, and it's been fun to sort of see where it started and where it's currently, and then it's hard to predict where it's going to go in the future. If I could plug my university, Illinois just started in the last year or two a kind of what they're calling a personalized nutrition platform, where they're really looking at this. And again, it's because of their expertise in the basic molecular cellular space that I think they're a great institution to take this on, because that's essentially what you're kind of marrying up, that the diet aspect, what's in these foods, and then what is going to be the impact on the expression of certain genes or And again, that's going to vary depending on certain individuals and what their genetic or even their phenotype is. So I think that's going to be fun to watch. I think I wouldn't be waiting for anything soon. I think it's a complex area of study, and it's going to take a lot of time to better understand that. But it's certainly, I think, something to be excited about for the future. And as much as I can, I try to stay up on that science, but it's evolving so fast, and it's it's happening at so many different levels that it's hard to be as current as I would like to be. But I think that is the future of nutrition. And I think, 50 years from now, it's going to look a lot different than it does today.
Absolutely. I about 20 feet away or so, I also have 3 kids. And, the last 19 years or so, I've always told them, you got to eat a good breakfast. But I pulled up your paper from Advances in Nutrition in 2017, Methodological Challenges in Studying and Examining the Effects of Breakfast on Cognitive Performance and Appetite in Children and Adolescents. Am I giving them the right advice?
Yes. What I tell my kids all the time is I try to make it easy. You want protein for breakfast. Okay. If you're going to put something in your body for breakfast, try to make sure it has some protein in there.
I ate a lot of protein for breakfast too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, my kids are huge egg fans. We eat a lot of yogurt. My breakfast, embarrassingly, if I'm heading out the door, I grab a cheese stick, because to me, that protein in the morning just helps me be less hungry throughout the day than if I were to have something that was higher in carbs. And I think, the research mostly supports that. So, doing any satiety work like that work that we did there is a challenge for many reasons. But I think most experts would agree that having some protein in the morning is advantageous to health and brain function, especially, I think, in kids.
It was just I had tuna fish for breakfast this morning, by the way. So I'm full of protein. I need for my cognitive performance for this discussion.
Yeah.
Tia, coming back to you as we get to wrap things up. Obviously, you had fascinating journey to date in academia, in private industry, in the non-profit realm. Take a couple of minutes and just important mentors, influencers, friends, family along the way that have been there with you. Anyone you want to shout out to, mention specifically, please take the floor on that one.
Oh, so many, because I think one of my favorite things about this field that I've chosen of nutrition is that it is very collaborative. Everybody's willing to help out, whether you're a young person getting started or whether you're mid-career or on the other end of your career. I found everybody to be extremely generous with their time and with their insights. And I always encourage young people, don't hesitate to reach out to anyone in this sector, because everyone is there, because we all share this passion for, at the end of the day, looking for ways to improve people's health. That's fundamentally why people choose a PhD in nutrition, is to be able to make an impact on somebody's health. And so I think because we all share that at the root of it, that everybody's very generous with their time. So my advisors throughout University of Illinois, and I had some fantastic faculty there. I mentioned before the personalized nutrition program. Sharon Donovan is heading that up at Illinois. Okay. Brilliant. John Erdman was the head of the division when I was down there. And these are people that are extremely busy, have their hands in a number of different things, and would stop everything if you had a question for them. My advisor was Neil Shea. He was a high school teacher before he went back to get his PhD. And so, he just loved to teach and educate for his whole, his whole career. And so he was a wonderful mentor to have there. And then I was really fortunate to have some amazing bosses, which, I think often we focus on the ones that were challenging, and I've had some of those too, but I really had some wonderful mentors with my managers, Kevin Mackey being one of them. He was who I worked with at the contract research organization. At Kraft Foods, I had 9 bosses in 8 years, and I would say almost all of them were fantastic in different ways. Pat Krutler was the one that recruited me into Kraft, who just was again, you find these people and you don't appreciate them at the time, but when you reflect back and think, here I am talking to you, at this company, Ajinomoto, and it's really because of this brilliant woman that recruited me into Kraft so many years ago, and I probably have not thanked her enough for giving me the opportunity, because it certainly led me here today. So Don Lehman is another person that he, on the protein side of things, he was part of the reason that I joined the American Egg Board, because he was affiliated with that at the time. He was faculty at University of Illinois and still remains a good friend. So, and I'm sure there's so many other people. Chris Staffelli, who you mentioned before, is a wonderful colleague and confidant, and we share a lot of information often about how we see the world in nutrition, and how we can continue to make these advances on making sure that we're bringing the science forward and doing it in a way that's credible. And then I think the key thing, and this is the part of my job that I love, is how do you communicate it?
Yep.
And depending on who you're talking to, it's a very different approach, whether you're talking to a registered dietitian who are very science forward and want to understand what the research shows, or if you're talking to just a general consumer who is skeptical maybe, and they're skeptical of you because you work for the food company that makes MSG, and why should they believe you when you tell them that it's safe? So it's, that's the challenge. I think the biggest challenge is communicating nutrition. Everybody thinks they're an expert because everybody eats food.
Yep.
It's really kind of finding that common ground and leading with facts in a way that people can, that it resonates with them. And I think that's the key learning that I've had over the years is, how do you strike a chord with somebody so that they are willing to listen to the information? And that's going to be different depending on who you're talking to.
Absolutely. Are you getting any swimming in while you're doing all the myth busting?
Alas, no. I still am having these shoulder challenges that I had that led me out of swimming years ago. So I'm now a runner and bicycling when I can.
Okay. I wasn't sure if during lunch. I know you're several miles from the lake, but still.
No, I miss it, and I love watching it on TV, and certainly I have a nephew who just is a freshman now at University of Missouri that's swimming there. So I'm still involved, but as a spectator and as a sideline cheerleader.
There you go. Well, this was really great. It's a fascinating journey that you've been on, and really wishing you the best with all of this moving forward. Really, really exciting domain. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode on our podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Tia Raines, Vice President of Customer Engagement and Strategic Development at Ajinomoto Health and Nutrition North America. Tia, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while. Thanks for everything you're doing there on the health and wellness side. And as we say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through all your research and advocacy. Really, really impressive stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate it.